Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today's episode I'm going to be addressing some... Oh, darn it. I'm going to be addressing some points that were brought up by people in response to my other video on the biblical cosmology, vindicating Pangea and the flat earth and all this stuff. So, I want to say, something that a lot of people have issue with is this idea, a lot of Christians, creationists, I'm obviously a creationist because I believe that God created all things, just maybe not a younger creationist, but either way, we have people who really dislike the idea that God, that the earth is older than, say, 6,500 years or something like that. That's a difficult concept for a lot of people to grasp. A lot of, people that are more atheistic, whatever, and less inclined towards the virtue of religion, right? They struggle with this idea that, I saw a hawk fly across the road. They struggle with this idea that there could be a creator of all things, and also that the earth could be old. They suffer, I think, a little too much when they think that that God, because they often hear this young earth theory of creation. They're like, oh, well, according to the Bible, the earth is only 6,500 years old or something like that. These people suffer a lot and struggle with this concept. It's a stumbling block for them because they say, well, this is what Christians say or have believed, blah, 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 blah. How can we then reconcile that with, the obvious, what they think to be an obvious older earth, Now, there are a few thoughts I have on that. One is that the earth is, it very well could be that since God created the natural processes that exist in creation, it's perfectly rational to believe that he did build something with age, right? That there is inbuilt age into the features of the earth because it just is natural that would be the case, right? Because if he's creating, he is creating everything, including these natural processes, you would think he would then use those natural processes in his creation. I think that's perfectly rational. But either way, I think a lot of people, there's kind of a lot of contention between these two subjects. Some people really, in the Christian camp, often will get very worked up about the idea that the earth could be older, that it's not just young, and that, I think some people even get annoyed with the church, with the Catholic Church, in her unwillingness to weigh authoritatively in one position or the other. Because they're like, well, that's not fair because one's in the Bible. And it's like, yes, but also Genesis is largely poetic prose. It's Hebrew poetic prose. And if you know anything about Hebrew poetic prose and just Hebrew poetry in general, right? Hebrew's what? What's this got to do with brewing? Either way, you understand that they don't rhyme with words, right? This is actually a thing with prose and a lot of different, kind of Semitic or Mediterranean cultures, right? Where you have this idea of rhyming concepts as opposed to rhyming words. So constantly you see this reiteration of certain concepts and certain truths, right? That is, that the authors of Genesis seek to reveal to the reader, right? That God created man in his image and likeness. And also that God created all the earth. Now, something that's fun, right, is that God, when he creates us in his image and likeness, this does not necessarily mean that when we think of image, right, it doesn't just mean our humanoid feature, right? Because before God became incarnate, before he himself was incarnate as man, he did not have possess that physical body with which to model things off of. Certainly he could take on the properties of a man in some capacity, and he could do anything. He could do all things, right? He can do all things. But my thoughts on this are that since necessarily we understand that the image and likeness is in our rationality, in our rational, immortal soul, right? That God has given to us a certain capacity for reason and a free will that we might use in whatever way we see fit, obviously, because that's the nature of free will, but also He desires for us to use it to love Him properly. So, what does this mean about God's image and likeness and us being in His image and likeness? Well, it means that our physical appearance is not necessarily going to that is not necessarily the image of God. Because you think about all the people, because sin has entered into the world, there is much discord and there's much destruction and pain and suffering, right? That's not something that God has caused, and it certainly is not of our nature to be like that. So it is not in our nature, that being the nature that is in the image and likeness of God. It is not in that nature to be broken or be deformed or have cognitive or physical disability, right? So we know that it is our soul, truly, and then also it is our soul first that is in the image and likeness of God, and then our body also that is in the image and likeness of God. And that becomes clearer when we recognize that God has become incarnate as man. When He becomes incarnate, then it truly, that shared connection, is there in a greater sense. Either way, some people struggle with the idea of other hominids and everything, other hominid species and other, like Neanderthals and things like that, or even, apes, like, oh, how could they look so similar to us or be so similar, right? Well, for one, I think, like people will ask, like, well, what the heck what was Adam doing while there are a bunch of, in Eden, when there's a bunch of Neanderthals running around outside? And I do not subscribe to the idea that, the fossil record or whatever is some devilish deception. I think that's silly, and I genuinely don't think God would permit that to be the case, to permit such a grave deception, right? And if that were the case, I think the church would, in some capacity, weigh against that, right? That would stand to reason. Unless, I guess, your concept of the church is that it's, the harlot of Babylon, right? Which, unfortunately, many non-Catholics do have that view, which is sad. So, pray for them for their conversions. But, yeah. So, I do think that these other hominids, these other species that look kind of like man, may not be man, the image and likeness of God in the same capacity. I also think perhaps there's the sense that, maybe even humans could breed with Neanderthals or whatever. Allegedly that's a thing. I don't know how true that is. I am a forester. I am a tree guy. I like trees. I love trees. But the extent of my knowledge of genetics doesn't really go much past tree genetics. I've done plenty of research in that, tree and other plant genetics, but not much in the human genome, so forgive me. But I think, and dare I say I know, that there is a very profound connection between these other hominid species and mankind as we know it, right? But perhaps it is the case that these species were not, were not like to Adam, right? Where, Adam had this, he was in communion with God, and he was made in God's image and likeness, and then he came to the world, when he was cast out of the garden, he and Eve, and they bred with other hominids or something. Who knows? Who knows what was happening? But I do know that the genome of man has degraded over time, which is why we don't live as long anymore. Either way, all that being said, I want to say something that people struggle with is like dinosaurs too. I think dinosaurs are dragons. I just think they're dragons, man. That's what they are. What the heck? And I believe man in some capacity has lived amongst them, probably before the flood. And perhaps they lived past that too. Perhaps there's something more to it, right? But we know that the Leviathan is a great beast that lived within the sea, and will at the end of days herald some kind of coming darkness, right? That he is part of the apocalypse. So there's that, and he is one of the beasts, right? He is like the devil in that sense. I don't prophecy, apocalyptic literature, love that stuff. Don't know what it means, but something that's really important that I wanted to touch on too, though, is that you have a lot of different people who will see this idea. I don't know if the earth was flat or whatever. It's like, but that's not really the point. I just think that it is. I think biblical cosmology does vindicate that, right? That the earth was flat. And it was. And there was a supercontinent on it, all right? It's Pangea, as we know. And there is geologic evidence that there was a supercontinent at one point, genetic evidence as well, and I think it makes perfect sense, right, that before the flood there was a supercontinent and all was together and Eden was at the center, right? And then the earth is shattered, creation is shattered, and then creation is destroyed by the floods, by these primordial waters, this primordial chaos that floods the earth and destroys it, disintegrates creation. Creation falls apart because right sacrifice ceases to exist. No longer is God worshipped as he ought to be. And so, because of that, the earth falls apart. Everything is destroyed. And then God brings out of those waters something good, once again, a good creation. And he starts over, and he teaches, the first thing he does is he teaches Noah to sacrifice, right? So either way, that knowledge is obviously passed on. The world continues, but the world also continues to fall apart today. That's something that's very obvious as we see natural disasters and everything. That's a consequence of sin, right? That's why the world was destroyed in the first place, the flood. So it's a consequence of sin. But when you look at it through this lens, in my opinion, in my belief, you look at it through this lens, and then you have this very strong argument in favor of basically this you look at the science behind it and everything, the evidence of these similar genetic makeup of different species and everything, this dispersion of genetics, right? As the genes of different animals are very similar, and they even can they have a shared heritage and parentage, right? But they continue to express a different phenotype, right, to the point where they look, in some cases, very different or almost unrecognizable, but they're very similar, different varieties, right? Man is the same way. Man is splintered and shattered as the world is destroyed, right? And he spreads out across the world, and then God gives to man the grace in these different places to grow and to basically grow into the place that they live, their new inheritance, So, all that being said, I do believe that the firmament was real, right? And I also believe the earth, I think it would have made sense that the earth would be flat in some capacity, right? With this big supercontinent in the middle. You know why I believe that? I believe that, I think it makes sense to me because Tolkien, in the Silmarillion, speaks of the world and Arda and everything beforehand, right? And the relation with Beleriand and Middle Earth, basically what is to become Middle Earth, and which is this great big landmass in the center of these roiling oceans and everything, and on the way to the west is Valinor, the land of God, basically, of the angels and of the elves and everything, and then of course is Numenor as well. Well, with the Great Calamity and the evil of Numenor, when the Numenorians begin to worship false gods and then cease to worship God, Eru Iluvatar, in their temples, God destroys the earth. He sinks Numenor, Atlantis, this great civilization, which is a victim of their own hubris, sinks them, destroys them. They are, cast into the outer dark, basically. You have a few survivors on the Ark, basically Isildur and his ilk, his people, like to Noah in some capacity, and they then end up, God literally changes the shape of the earth. And I think that's perfectly accurate, right? Because you see the seas, the roiling seas swallowing up creation. The same thing with Beleriand, right? It sunk beneath the ocean in the War of, the War of Wrath, I think. And so I think this is accurate. argue with me all you want. You're still wrong. But yeah, so we see this, I think, in our world. This is my thoughts on it, right? This is not some authoritative, religious example, but I believe the cosmological, evidence from biblical cosmology and from what the ancients did think about the world speaks for itself in this case. That there is a belief in something akin to this. The creation is destroyed and then creation is remade. So why then wouldn't God necessarily, if he's going to spread out the continents and everything as well? Maybe he created this earth round and everything and did all this other stuff. However, this doesn't get into inner earth. I'm not going to do that in this video, but maybe another time. We'll get into, I'll have my father on here, who is a geologist, a very, very smart man, one of the smartest men I know, absolute genius. He can talk about the plausibility of inner earth and great caverns within the earth and all kinds of stuff like that. Yeah, okay. Everyone, thank you for watching. This is a fun little video. I'll throw this up. Maybe I'll throw it up next week or something as a little response. So either way, everyone, God bless you. Pray for me. I'll pray for you. And everyone have a blessed day. And I suppose whenever you're watching this, I'm filming this on a Friday, so have a wonderful day of whichever day you end up watching this on, but pray that I have a wonderful Friday and a good weekend. Also, remember that prayer exists outside of time, right? So you can pray for me in the future, and those prayers are efficacious in the past. Very cool. So also pray for all your dead relatives as well. We're not going to get into that. It's not like Mormons, right, where you can, baptize your ancestors. No, you can't do that, but you can pray for them. So either way, God bless you all.